cycles of violence. 2000s. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, many homes, schools, and places of worship were under attack from bombing and shelling by Sri Lankan Air Force jets. This photo shows one incident of many for Tamil adults and Tamil school children during the 2000s. They lived in fear and were under constant attack from the Sri Lankan Army and Air Force. Massacres that occurred between 2005 to 2007. The following list shows massacres that took place between 2005 and 2007. Rajapaksa comes to power. Mahinda Rajapaksa was elected president in 2005 as a candidate of the United People's Freedom Alliance, UPFA. At the time, the Sri Lankan government was in the midst of ongoing peace talks and ceasefire agreement with the Liberation Tigers of Tamil, LTTE, also known as the Tamil Tigers, a separatist organization that sought to establish an independent Tamil state in northern and eastern Sri Lanka due to Tamil people experiencing decades of oppression and state-sponsored violence by the Sri Lankan state. Rajapaksa announced his intention in 2006 to eradicate LTTE, which had operated as both an army and a de facto government in the Tamil homeland of the north and east of Sri Lanka for more than 20 years. On 3rd of January 2008, the government of Sri Lanka formally notified the Royal Norwegian government of its decision to terminate the agreement on a ceasefire, CFA, between the government of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil, which was signed on the 22nd of February 2002. The brutally military onslaught began against the LTTE and the Tamil people. In 2009, the Sri Lankan army defeated the Liberation Tigers of Tamil, LTTE. Rajapaksa's popularity surged locally within the Sinhalese community, but international observers criticized his army's brutality in the war's final battle, which had led to the deaths of many Tamil civilians. Trinco 5 Students Massacre. On 2nd of January 2006, many young Tamil students gathered at the popular meeting spot, which was the Gandhi statue at the junction of Dockyard Road near the ocean in Trincomalee. Some Sri Lankan soldiers arrived in a three-wheeler and threw a grenade at this group of Tamil students. A young Tamil student, Yoharasa Poongulalan, was injured in this grenade attack. As the other Tamil students were getting ready to take the injured student to the hospital, the Sri Lankan Navy arrived at the spot and began shooting at the students. The Tamil people there panicked and fled in all directions. The Sri Lankan Navy approached a few Tamil students, ordered them to lie on the ground, and shot them indiscriminately. 5 Tamil students were killed in this massacre, which is known as the Trinco 5 Massacre. Another 5 Tamil students were seriously injured. Sugirtharajan, a journalist for the Tamil daily newspaper Sudaroli, wrote a full-length investigative article about the killing of the 5 Tamil students, identifying the Sri Lankan army as the culprit. He was shot dead on 6th of January 2006. Action against Hunger Aid Workers Massacre. For many Tamil civilians in the embargoed Tamil homeland, aid organizations and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, provided a lifeline. The Sri Lankan government focused on these organizations as they got in the way of the government's strategy to starve the Tamils out into submission. Furthermore, these organizations were a source of impartial information to the outside world. Hence, their workers were targeted. Action Against Hunger is a French charity known as Action contre la faim in the French language. Aid workers from Action Against Hunger were providing assistance to survivors of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. On 6th of August 2006, 17 Tamil Action Against Hunger Aid workers were executed in their offices in Moodur, Sri Lanka. The perpetrators of this massacre were members of the Sri Lankan government forces. This constitutes a war crime, as the Geneva Convention rules that during wartime, civilians and aid workers' protection remains an unfringible principle of international humanitarian law. Since then, government authorities have taken no action to bring those responsible for the murders to justice. Action Against Hunger continues to demand the persecution of these perpetrators. After helping more than 100,000 people in Sri Lanka since 2005, the organization decided to leave the country 2 years after the killings. Many other aid organizations' aid workers came under attack, including several volunteers from the charity Tamil Rehabilitation Organization, TRO, who were abducted, never to return, and the Sri Lankan Monitoring Mission, SLMM, which was in the Tamil homeland to monitor the ceasefire agreement. The 17 Tamil Action Against Hunger Aid workers. These were the 17 Tamil Action Against Hunger Aid workers who were killed by members of the Sri Lankan government forces, 2006 to 2009. More than 419,059 Tamil people were displaced following renewed hostilities beginning on the 26th of July 2006, when Sri Lanka Air Force fighter jets bombed several LTTE camps around Marvil Are Anikat. This was the start of Ulam War 4, massacres that occurred between 2008 to 2009. From 2008, the Sri Lankan army began their northern offensive, which ultimately ended with the most horrific period known as the Mullivaikal massacre in 2009. This is a list of various attacks by the Sri Lankan armed forces on the Tamil people from 2008 to 2009. No Fire Zone 2009. In January 2009, the Sri Lankan government declared the first no-fire zone, and so Tamil civilians went to that area to take refuge. The no-fire zone was then deliberately targeted and bombed daily by the Sri Lankan armed forces. In April 2009, a new no-fire zone was declared. Again, the no-fire zone was deliberately targeted and bombed daily. As a result, thousands of innocent Tamil civilians, Tamil men, women, children, the elderly and unborn were maimed and killed. No Fire Zone 2009. Tamil civilians were on the move constantly and lived between tents and makeshift bunkers within the no-fire zone. The Tamil people were under constant daily attacks by indiscriminately shelling from Sri Lankan Air Force jets. No Fire Zone 2009. These were the conditions that the Tamil civilians lived in for many months. The Tamil people were hoping and waiting for help from the international community. No Fire Zone 2009. Tamil civilians, young and old, were constantly on the move and spent a lot of time in bunkers to protect themselves from bombs being dropped by the Sri Lankan Air Force on the densely Tamil civilian populated no-fire zone. Food and medicine as weapons of war. The Sri Lankan state used food and medicine as weapons of war. These were intentionally prevented by the state from reaching the no-fire zone. Many Tamil people became malnourished and starved to death. No-fire zone 2009. There were many makeshift hospitals within the no-fire zone which were constantly targeted and bombed by the Sri Lankan Air Force. No-fire zone 2009. There was a lack of hospital beds, adequate equipment and medical supplies in these makeshift hospitals. Many severely injured Tamil civilians were in crowded rooms, lying on the floor, waiting to be treated by doctors and nurses who were outnumbered. Doctors had to amputate the limbs of severely injured Tamil civilians without anesthetics. No-fire zone, 2009. Everything within the no-fire zone was completely destroyed by government shelling. No-fire zone, 2009. Many Tamil civilians moved to beaches with the little belongings they had, but were subject to artillery fire and bombs from the Sri Lankan Army and Air Force, as can be seen by the smoke in this photo. No-fire zone, 2009. Hundreds of thousands of Tamil civilians died in the no-fire zone. No-fire zone, 2009. The bodies of these victims were buried beneath the sand of beaches. No-fire zone, 2009. According to the Kacheri government department, the population in Vanni was 429,059 in early October 2008. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNOCHA, update as of 10th of July 2009, the total number of Tamil people who came out of the Vanni to government-controlled areas was estimated to be 282,380. 146,679 Tamil people were killed, went missing in 2009 alone, and their loved ones are still searching for them to this day. May 2009. According to World Bank household data, 169,796 Tamil people are unaccounted for. May 2009. After the brutal ending of the armed struggle, hundreds of thousands of Tamil people, many of whom were seriously injured, malnourished, after months of hardship in the no-fire zone, had no choice but to go into the custody of the Sri Lankan Army with the very few belongings they carried with them. Concentration camps. The Sri Lankan Army forcibly moved 280,000 internally displaced Tamil people from the no-fire zone into concentration camps. Concentration camps. Tamil families were split up, with many going missing after being called to be questioned by the Sri Lankan Army. Concentration camps. Tamil men and women were subject to rape, sexual violence, and torture. Joseph Camp, one of the most notorious torture camps, which Jagat Jayasuriya was in command of. Concentration camps. The concentration camps were overcrowded, unsanitary, and ridden with disease. Concentration camps. Many Tamil children were in these camps for many weeks, months, and years, and so had no education as a result. Concentration camps. The Tamil people lost everything they once owned. A lot of the surviving Tamil civilians sustained serious injuries, such as losing limbs, suffered great pain and loss. Everyone lost at least one loved one. They witnessed and lived through it all. Post-Mullivaikkal violence, 2009. The cycle of violence continues. The cycle of violence in Sri Lanka continues with increased militarization in the Tamil homeland in the north and east of Sri Lanka. Tamil families of the forcibly disappeared Tamils are still searching for their loved ones. No accountability, complete impunity, no justice for the Tamil victims of state-sponsored massacres of Tamils over 7 decades. Many Tamil civilians, as well as Tamil and Sinhalese journalists, have been abducted in white vans and killed by the state and paramilitary groups. One such incident is the disappearance of the journalist and cartoonist Prageeth Eknaliguda, who was disappeared on 10th of January 2010. In 2014, during Mahinda Rajapaksha's term, violence against Muslims increased, with Muslims' homes and shops being looted, burned and destroyed by Sinhala Buddhist nationalists reminiscent of the 1983 Black July anti-Tamil pogrom. With the return of Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2019, there is increased militarization of the northeast of the island and of daily activities. Current situation. Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, stated in her report in February 2021 that she is deeply concerned by the trends that have emerged over the past year, which may represent early warning signs of a deteriorating human rights situation. Believes that the Human Rights Council should urgently pay attention to these early warning signs and continue its close monitoring of and engagement on developments in Sri Lanka. She urges member states to pursue alternative international options for ensuring justice and reparations and to strengthen capacity to make progress. Sri Lanka is susceptible to ethnic violence as it has experienced such incidents many times in the past. 12 years on. 12 years on since 2009, there is still the presence of the military in the north and east of the island. Military intimidation, lack of free speech, lack of freedom of press and association, ongoing land grabs, Politicization, and the continued imprisonment of Tamil political figures, young Tamil men and women under the Draconian Prevention of Terrorism Act, PTA. Memorialization and denial. All of these massacres are etched into the minds of all Tamil people. The victims of these atrocities are remembered through memorial events and memorial monuments. Currently, memorializing Tamil victims is suppressed by the Sri Lankan military and police. Memorialization and denial. In January 2021, the Jaffna University Mullivaikal Memorial Monument was destroyed by the Sri Lankan security forces. By destroying this memorial monument, this shows that the Sri Lankan state is trying to hide from the atrocities they have committed against the Tamil people. And we will continue to remember the victims of these atrocities, and we will continue the fight for justice. Cycles of violence.